Hi, we're going to talk about chapter 7.1 today about square roots and the perfect square. So remember, a square root is a number that when you multiply it by itself, it gives you the given number. Every positive number has a positive and a negative square root, because remember, two negatives, when you multiply them together, gives you a positive answer. And a perfect square is a number with integers as its square root. So numbers that have a whole number, positive or negative, as their square root. So the first example talks about just finding the square root of a perfect square. And you can do this, if you're not sure what it is, you can use your calculator. And there is a symbol on your calculator that looks kind of like a divide sign, but it has a little tail on it. And it's called the radical sign, or the square root sign, whichever. I'll probably call it the square root sign most of the time. But so when you see a number, it says find the two square roots of 49. So think to yourself, what number, when you multiply it by itself, is going to give you 49? And hopefully you think, oh, 7. So 7 times 7 gives you 49. But you also have to remember that negative 7 times negative 7 also gives you 49. So the square roots of 9 are 7 and negative 7. Example 2, you can see finding the square roots of all different types of numbers. So just a normal number or like a perfect square. What is the square root of 25? Hopefully you know that 5 times 5 is 25. And so the answer, when you have the square root sign by itself, they're just asking you for what is the positive square root. So that would be just 5. And you'll see in example B, there'll be a negative on the outside. And then they're looking for the negative square root. So the negative, they want to know the negative square root of 9 over 16. Now, when you get a fraction underneath your square root symbol, the first thing I do is to see if I can take the square root of the top and the square root of the bottom. To see if they're perfect squares. If they are, you can do that. Otherwise, and you'll see later on in the section, you might need to divide first and then see if you can take the square root of that. In this case, 9 and 16 are both perfect squares. So you take the square root of 9 and you get 3, and you take the square root of 16 and you get 4. So 3/4, but it's asking you for the negative square root. So your answer should be negative 3/4. Really, you just kind of look out in front and it will tell you if they want the positive or the negative or both. As an example, letter C, there's a plus sign and a negative sign out front. So they want both the positive and the negative square roots of 2.25. And so in this one, I just plugged it into my calculator and I did get 1.5. So the answer would be a positive 1.5 and a negative 1.5. So I'd like for you to try 1 through 6 on your own. I'm going to go ahead and put the answers in the margins here as you work. Okay, so number 1 is asking you to find the two square roots of 36. So that would be a positive 6 and a negative 6. And I just write with plus and negative out in front, honestly, because it's less writing. Number 2 would be positive 10 and negative 10. And number 3 would be positive 11 and negative 11. Number 4 is then asking to find the square root or roots. So number 4, it's asking you to find the negative square root of 1. Well, the square root of 1 is 1, so it would just be negative 1. Number 5, let me see, this positive and negative square root of 4 over 25. Well, I know 4 is a perfect square, it's 2. And 25 is a perfect square too, it's 5. So the answer would be positive and negative 2/5. 2/5. All right, and number 6. The square root of 12.25. So I would go ahead and put that in my calculator. And it comes out to be 3.5. Now there's no negative sign out front, so I know they just want the positive square root. Okay? All right, let's go on to the next page. On the next page now, we're going to go ahead and see some square roots in an expression, and we're going to try to evaluate them. So squaring a positive number and finding a square root, those are inverse operations, okay? Because they're kind of like, they undo each other, like multiplying by 5 and dividing by 5. If you multiply a number by 5 and then divide by 5, you end up with what you started with. Much like if you square a number and then take the square root of it, or vice versa, you're going to end up with what you started with. Okay? So my suggestion when you're evaluating these expressions is to do the square root first. So if in letter A I have 5 times the square root of 36 plus 7. So I'm going to do the square root first. So the square root of 36 is 6. And then it's kind of like order of operations after that. So 6 times 5 is 30. 30 plus 7 is 37. Okay? 1/4 plus the square root of 18 over 2. So this is a different type of example. 18 is not a perfect square. So you don't want to take the square root of 18 and the square root of 2 because you're going to get some crazy decimal number. So when that doesn't work out, try to divide inside the square root sign. So 18 divided by 2 is 9. 9 is a square number. So I can take the square root of 9 and I get 3. So really this whole thing right here is just 3. So 3 plus 1/4 is 3 1/4. And letter C is doing the inverse operation like we just talked about. The square root of 81 is 9, but then you're going to square it. 9 squared is 81. So you're right back with 81 where you started with, and then you're going to subtract 5, so you get 76. So if you see this combination, your answer is going to be whatever's inside your square root, because you're kind of negating the square root when you square it. Okay? All right, so let's try. We're going to skip number 4 because we haven't talked about circles. We will later in the year, but we haven't talked about them yet. So we're going to skip down and do 7, 8, and 9. So 7. minus 3 times the square root of 25. So I'm going to write 12 minus, I know the square root of 25 is 5. 3 times 5 is 15. So 12 minus 15 gives me negative 3. Number 8. 28 is not a perfect square, so I'm not going to take the square root of 28 and the square root of 7. I'm going to divide that first. So 24 divided by 7 is 4. So the square root of 4 is 2. So 2 plus 2.4 gives me 4.4. And the last one, number 9, I have 15 minus, the square root of 4 is 2, and 2 squared is 4. So it's really 15 minus 4, which gives me 11. So I hope that clarifies a little bit of square roots and perfect squares and solving them in an expression. Thank you.